I'm Tom Carl. Welcome to Politics in Perspective. I think we have an interesting show as usual. Thank you to Ex American News for covering us, AUNTV, worldviewtube.com. Of course, you can get us on uh, YouTube and Rumble. Today, we're going to talk about, if we bring up this slide, we're going to talk about, do the parties need new ideas? I hear this all the time. They have no new ideas. We're going to talk about that. Our difference maker interview is with Kenneth Abramowitz, a hugely successful businessman who's concerned about the cultural drift in America and the threat to Western civilization of Islam. We're going to hear what he has to say. And in our political roundup, we're going to talk about Democrats and socialism as it relates to affordability. And with that, let's get right at it with my opening statement. I recently put this on Facebook. I often hear that our political parties have no new ideas. Actually, in history, on the left, they have a variation of one idea: government control, government involvement. On the right, the one idea that has mattered is the degree of freedom from government control. And that's really the large debate between government action and freedom from government action. The relative absence of government control began with private property, which in time had led to a private economy, wealth, and a counterbalance to centralized government control. So what do I mean by that? Well, for most of history, we lived in poverty. 95+% lived in poverty, 97%. And the economy was owned by monarchs or feudal lords, manorialism, these kinds of things where the same people owned the economy that owned political power. So a king owned all the land and you worked the land, but you had nothing for yourself. What changed was people eventually creating their own wealth through creating more goods than they had to give away to the king, and beginning to acquire private property, and then bartering and exchanging goods and building wealth. And as that private sector grew and pulled away from what the king owned, that is where true freedom begins. Because if you have control over your own life as opposed to having to answer to someone else, that's where true freedom is. And what made America successful was that its economy was apart from the king. And when it came time for the U.S. economy and the U.S. political world to separate, because America had so much economic strength and freedom, it could counterbalance the king and even the king's army. The failure of the French and Russian revolutions, and I cover this in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, was because, in fact, there was never that counterbalance between a private economy and the government. The United States succeeded because it had a private economy that was a balance against the government. And as that diminishes, so do our freedoms. Along the same timeline I just described came dissent, the ability to say no to government. The Magna Carta was a milestone in that regard. You had people, admittedly nobles, better off than most, who said, we need to be able to have a certain degree of our own freedom. Now, that's not the words they used, but at some level, it was this: we need to be able to say to government, you are wrong. That is where freedom truly begins. If you can say to your government, no, you're wrong, and you have the right to redress government, to say to government, not only you're wrong, but here is what we demand in redress for what was done wrong, that is where freedom begins. So my point in this segment is for people to understand that when they say the parties need new ideas, actually, that's not what history really thinks. What history shows is that there is this dynamic between those whose idea is based in government control and government action versus those who have this idea that the individual should be free of thought and free from government control. And everything else sort of falls into that. So if you look at when the Democrats, quote, come up with a new idea in the United States, it's almost uniformly an idea of something else government is going to do. Government's going to tax you over here and pay for X. They're going to run a government program. And then you have to fit into the rules and under the control of the government program. So every new form of government program involves government control, and therefore you lose some of your freedom. At the very least, they've taxed you to a greater degree, and you've lost that freedom. If you're a Catholic charity of the United States and you take any government money, you therefore have to apply to their rules. There's a group of nuns currently suing the government again because they have to provide services that they believe are counter to their religion. But if you take federal money, federal control comes with it, and you have to adjust your behavior to do what the government says. So all of the left in history has been about governments and government control. Socialists, communists at the worst, Democrats in the United States, all of it. Now, that is not to say that there haven't been politicians on the right who do much the same. But historically, they have wanted less of that, some dramatically less of that, including our founders. People who understood that government control comes at the price of freedom and economic prosperity. You can only have so much government before the burden of it pulls down the economy, which is where America resides today. We grow much slower than we should. Government regulations and taxes restrain the economy, restrain growth and standard of living. And this is, and in that slowness, you get stagnation and sustained poverty. But the left doesn't see it that way. They don't see that they're the cause of the slowdown. They blame capitalists, and then they say we should have more government control. That's what Bernie Sanders says today, that Elon Musk has more wealth than some percentage of the population. But Elon Musk did not take his wealth from the population. He's said to be a trillionaire. Well, what made him a trillionaire? The stock market. I don't know anyone in the stock market who had to give something to Elon Musk for him to become a trillionaire. No, they went public. People, the market says the shares are worth a certain number. Tomorrow it'll say it'll be less. Day after that, it could be more. But he doesn't take that from anyone. And he certainly doesn't require you to give money to his corporation. Those are the actions of freedom. The left wants to control that. Bernie Sanders wants to control it. So as you listen to this notion that that the parties need new ideas, just keep in mind two broad categories. On the left, they want some sort of government intervention and control, some program, which will cost you either your freedom, your taxes, or freedom of thought. On the right, the one idea that should matter is the idea that founded the United States, which that individual liberty will lead to the greatest happiness. We don't need new ideas. We need to understand the two big ideas that have told the tale of history from the beginning of time. All right. Next up, just briefly, I want to talk about this notion of inflation. The Iran war is driving up gas prices. That is not inflation. That is a restriction on the supply of gas, and therefore gas prices rise. You've heard of supply and demand. Inflation is a monetary problem where you print dollars or excess coins and you devalue it, and therefore prices rise. It would be wrong, as Jerome Powell did, when supply shortages increase CPI, to raise interest rates. If gas prices rise, then people have less money to spend, and businesses less money to spend on everything else, right? If your gas prices go up $3 a gallon, for every gallon you use a week, that's $3 you don't have to buy food, buy sweaters, shoes, or something for your child. All of those things. The notion that therefore the Fed should raise interest rates, what are rising interest rates? Another added cost. So rising gas prices actually holds back much of the economy. Raising interest rates would hold back even more of the economy. So the notion that out there among so many that we somehow should raise interest rates because CPI, which is based in significant part on rising gas prices, that we should raise interest rates is the exact wrong thing to do. If we're fighting a war and that is hurting consumers, we should not punish them further by raising interest rates. That will punish the economy as a whole and hurt every American. So when you hear Chuck Schumer says Trump's causing more inflation, he's wrong. And no one should say that the Fed should raise interest rates in response to that. Well, that's my opening statement. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. We'll be right back with author and successful businessman, Wall Street Hall of Fame analyst Ken Abramowitz, to talk to you about the cultural drift in America and what he sees America should do going forward. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. As you know, the Iran war has heated up again, and so I always try and bring unique and powerful perspectives to this particular war because, in my view, and I've said this for some 20 years, Iran is the most dangerous country on earth. And what I mean by that is Iran, unlike Russia or China, which plods along in what it does, Iran is willing to take risks and would use very dangerous weapons if they had them. So today I'm pleased to have Ken Abramowitz speak with us today. He is the managing general partner and co-founder of NGN Capital, a huge healthcare venture capital fund. He's in the Wall Street Analyst Hall of Fame, which I think is rather amazing. But to today's issues, he's the founder of Save the West, which is dedicated to saving Western civilization from itself. And I want to ask him from himself. And he's also the author of the book, The Multifront War, Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics, and Racial Strife. So, Ken, thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure, it's great to be with you.
So, sir, your Save the West, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, but you said saving Western civilization from itself. Please tell us what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, we're in what I call World War III. We're fighting, according to me, 21 wars at the same time. 3 bad guys, 7 forms of warfare. I'll explain in a minute. So that's 21 wars. Now, when you're fighting 21 wars or fronts in World War III, you need a unified population. Think of it like World War II. Can you imagine if we weren't around then, but just from history, can you imagine if we were fighting World War II and 40% of the country wanted to lose? So 60% are trying to win, 40% are trying to lose. And then we need more money. And the 40% start yelling that we shouldn't devote more money to World War II, let's just lose. And it doesn't matter if the Germans take over Europe, we're in America. So in our World War III, we have about 40% of the people, depending on the poll, sometimes 30, sometimes 52, but let's just call it 40% of the people want to lose. And that makes it difficult for the people who want to win. So that's why we're fighting against ourselves, because we're not a unified country.
And you say save it from itself. So you also talk about cultural terrorism. I think you believe that America is in cultural decline. Please expand on that. Why is America? Why are you trying to save it from itself?
Well, we have 2 Americas. We have the but by the way, the 1861 to 65 Civil War never ended, according to me. So we're still fighting our Civil War. The Confederates changed their name to Democrats, so no one remembers that they were Confederates. So we're fighting the Confederate/Democrats in about 25 states, and 25% of the states are run by Republican governors. So we have 2 countries, a healthy country, the Republican half, and an unhealthy half, the Democrat half. So the Democrat half is in cultural decline. The Republican half is doing culturally fine. But I want the whole country to do fine. I don't want half of our country in cultural decline. I don't want half of the country rooting for America to lose World War III to its 3 enemies on 21 fronts. But that's the way it is. So that's why we have to fight an internal civil war. Fortunately, we're not killing each other. We have to fight an internal civil war with the Democrat Confederates, who do not recognize the federal government, do not recognize the Constitution or Bill of Rights or the wisdom of the Declaration of Independence. They're basically foreign enemies in our midst. But because we believe in freedom of speech, we allow them to speak. They're nonsense. And that makes life extra difficult, because when 40–50% of the people are speaking nonsense, it infects the normal half of the country also.
So let's bring this to a greater degree. I think you would agree that some of what you're talking about is occurring in Western Europe as well. Could you expand in that direction?
Well, yes, Western Europe is sick. Like America, it's roughly half and half between the sick portion and the healthy portion. Unfortunately, the sick portion is basically in charge of the major countries. And I'm hoping all the major countries have regime change and Republican equivalents take over and save those countries. We have to save those countries. America has a direct responsibility and interest in saving Western civilization. We cannot watch Western civilization be taken over by the Islamists, who will then proceed to kill all the Christians. I don't want to watch 400 or 500 million Christians die over the next 25–50 million years. That'll be the second Holocaust, and I'm determined to help prevent the second Holocaust. We had one Holocaust, that was bad enough. We don't need a second one.
Okay, so you mentioned the Islamists, so let's talk about the Iran war, because it is not just a war about Iran. It's a war, I think, conceptually larger on this issue of East versus West, Islam versus Christianity. Many have said, many American Catholic bishops have said, or cardinals have said, that the West, that Islam is not compatible with the West. You have American politicians saying Islam's not compatible with the West, and especially America. So if you could expand on that, or what is your view on it?
Well, first I'll give you a hint. The typical Islamist expression is Christians, Jews, and Hindus will convert to Islam and we're going to kill them. So I would say I think that's incompatible with the West. I don't know why I would rush to a judgment just after listening to one sentence like that. But to make it simple, we believe in the Ten Commandments. The Islamists don't believe in the Ten Commandments. So you could say we're fighting over the Ten Commandments. That's one way to look at it. You can say we're fighting over our Judeo-Christian God versus Allah. Now, the question is, who is Allah and what is Allah? I would say that Allah is Satan. So I would say we're fighting God versus Satan. Now, the reason I know that Allah is Satan is because Iran calls America the great Satan and Israel the little Satan. So if Iran thinks that our Judeo-Christian God is Satan and Iran lies 99% of the time, you can just flip it around and say, well, that means since you lie 99% of the time, that means your God is Satan and ours is a Judeo-Christian God who believes in the Ten Commandments, who believes in life, and your God believes in death. In fact, I would call Iran an Islamo-Nazi death cult. And so there's no compatibility between Nazis and Americans. We saw that in World War II. And now we're looking at second-generation Nazis, which I call Islamo-Nazi death cult, of which Iran is the pinnacle. And they've declared war on us for 47 years. And finally, we've declared war on them. It should have happened 47 years ago, but democracy is always wait. So here we are, and we have to destroy this, as I said, Islamo-Nazi death cult of evil, and we have to win and they have to lose. It's not very complicated.
Okay, so what is the process for them to lose? We are bombing them, but it's not immediately clear to me that the bombing of economic sites is going to turn the tide here. The IRGC is the elephant in the room, the gorilla that runs or wants to run that place. And no matter how many buildings fall, if they exist, Iran remains a danger. Not the Persian people they are subjugating, but their regime. So what is the end game for this war?
Well, I think World War III is a repeat of World War II. So how did our parents and grandparents win World War II? Well, you keep blowing things up. That helps. You keep economic boycotts of the country in question. Number three, you fight culturally. By that I mean with words. You say, I'm right, you're wrong, unconditional surrender. A fourth issue, which is contentious nowadays, boots on the ground. I don't think we need boots on the ground, but that's another way to win the war. But to answer your question, it's all of the above. If there's 4 ways, 8 ways, 10 ways to win a war, you have to use all of them. And now they're not going to surrender. So you just have to keep killing them till they don't exist. Now, I'm told that there's 2 or 3 million people with guns in Iran out of a population of 93 million people. Now, I don't think we have to kill all the 2 or 3 million people, but you certainly have to kill the leaders until the others lose their will to fight. Also, there are boots on the ground, but they don't have to be American boots on the ground. There's about 10 minorities that make up half of Persia or Iran, and we should be providing weapons to that half so that they can do the fighting and they will be the boots on the ground. Plus, we have 85% of the population who hates the Looney Tunes running the country. They were also boots on the ground. So we have plenty of boots on the ground, but they're not our boots.
Okay, so you mentioned democracies. Wait. Iran has been attacking America on and off for 47 years. I have a good friend who runs a security company for a third of the Fortune 500, and he tells me 40% of the hacks come from Russia, North Korea, China, and Iran, and they do it every single day in the thousands. Why you say democracies are slow? They are. Why, in your view, has America been so slow to respond to the multi-fronts, not just missiles or the shooting of soldiers?
Well, that's why I wrote my book. I thought of it 10 years ago. I wrote it 5 years ago, updated it every other year. It's now in its fourth edition. And I said to myself, what you just said, democracies are too slow because they don't have all the facts. And so I took it upon myself to try to convey those facts to the population. Now, the country needs 1,000 people like me, not one of me, to convey that. The reason is that our government's not playing its normal role. The government has not educated the population for the past 47 years as to who Iran is, why they're a death cult, why they have to be destroyed. So all of a sudden, President Trump says, oh, I'm going to blow up Iran. People go, where's Iran? What does that have to do with anything? I don't care about Iran. And so the country has not been educated, and that's why maybe only half the population supports the war. The other half doesn't even know who we're fighting and why we're fighting. And no one educated the people, because if you educated the people, you'd have to fight. In other words, if you told the people for 47 years before President Trump that Iran's an existential threat to America, they promised to kill everyone in the country and we have to fight them, they might have known that after 47 years. But our presidents didn't do that, and so President Trump got stuck with the responsibility of protecting us from Iran.
All right, so your book is talks about multiple fronts. One of those is cultural terrorism, as you refer to it. Please explain that to my listeners.
Well, let me just step back for 60 seconds because I told you there were 21 wars, but I didn't describe the 21 wars. So let me do that and then go to your cultural war question. So there's three bad guys or groups of bad guys, which I color code the reds, the greens, and the blues. The reds are the communists, traditional color for communists. Green are the Islamists, traditional color for Islam. And blue are the globalists, traditional color for the United Nations, helmets and flags, and plus other globalists. Now, the reds include China, Russia, North Korea, and Cuba, among others. The greens include Iran and Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, among others. And the blues are the United Nations, World Economic Forum, drug cartels, social media companies, and the EU. So these, and they're, by the way, they're all unelected criminal organizations. So these criminal organizations use 7 forms of warfare against us: physical or kinetic, in other words, things blow up. Number 2, chemical, biological, and arson. Number 3, cultural, which I'll talk about in 30 seconds. Number 4, economic. Number 5, legal. Number 6, demographic. Number 7, cyber. So if you take 7 forms of warfare and multiply by 3 groups of bad guys, you get 21 wars. Now, the war that we're the worst at is cultural warfare. Cultural warfare, the bad guys always have a minister of propaganda. I propose that we have a secretary of truth. But after I say that, everyone starts laughing, because who can define truth? I mean, I can, but we as a country cannot define truth. So we can't have a secretary of truth, but we could have a secretary of cultural preservation, which I proposed in my book. And that secretary and her team would compete with the minister of propaganda and her team in one of these criminal organizations. So they're very good at cultural warfare. We're very bad at cultural warfare, and it leads to one of my truisms that the forces of evil are good at being evil, and the forces of good are bad at being good. And I wrote the book to close the gap between good and evil, to encourage the forces of good to do a better job confronting the forces of evil.
So as you probably know, I wrote my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization. And it's a historical philosophy book that talks about the arc of civilizations. And basically, civilizations are born in faith with a common purpose, and they die in doubt. And that doubt you describe is 40% of the country, which doesn't seem to believe anymore in America as a force for good. So how within the paradigm you're setting up, do we overcome the fact that our school systems are teaching our students to hate the American culture? It accuses the American culture of being colonists and or oppressors or just slave owners and the like. How at this stage of our civilization do we overcome those hurdles to reach the goals that you support?
Well, I have a rule that I can fix anything in 5 minutes if I have President Trump's ear. I myself can't fix anything in 5 minutes, not even a tire on my car. But President Trump can do many things because he has the biggest microphone in the country and biggest microphone in the world. So if I had a minute to whisper in President Trump's ear, part of the 5 minutes, I would say, Mr. President, when was the last time you read a history book? And he would answer, like most politicians, when I was in high school. And I say, well, that was a while ago. What's happened to the history books since you were in high school? To which a President Trump or anyone would say, I guess they changed, but I don't know. I haven't read any of them. So I would say to him, instruct the Secretary of Education to have a mass reading of history books in the country. Let's just say to a state, get 100 history books, get a bunch of readers, young college graduates, and then read the books and produce a book report to the president within 10 days of the state of affairs. To what extent have the three great false narratives, red, green, and blue, infected our school books for our kids? So I could finish that in 5 minutes. The project wouldn't be finished in 5 minutes, but if President Trump were convinced and he called the Secretary of Education and she were convinced, then we could start the ball rolling and then find out who put these books in the hands of the kids, who hired the teachers, what teachers' colleges did they go to, how did this subversion come into the country, and then wipe it out. The number one way to wipe it out is through universal school choice. Essentially, give everybody a chance to bypass the public schools. That would be faster than actually fixing the public schools.
Yeah, the government takeover of schools has never worked out well in history with regard to cultural preservation. That's true in England today. It's true in America today. I think you view that Israel is on the front line in this war against the Islamists. It represents something more than 75 miles wide in this war. Please expand on that if you would.
Well, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues, the three great criminal organizations of today, all dictatorships, by the way, hate God, our Judeo-Christian God. Now, there's 2.5 billion Christians and Catholics in the world, and there's 16 million Jews. So what they've done is they've decided to go after the 16 million Jews, because 16 million in a population of 8 billion is pretty small. Now, what the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues actually want to do is go kill all the Christians either kill them physically or culturally. And so they decided to go after the Jews first, because Judaism is the foundation of Christianity. And I assume they figured that if you could knock out Jews, which they can't, but in their minds they can, then Christianity will come crumbling down. And then they'll go after the Christians. So to use President Trump's terminology, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues are after the Christians. It just so happens the Jews are in the way. Another way of saying the same thing relative to your question, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues are after America. It just so happens Israel's in the way. And that's why they're attacking Israel vociferously and attacking Jews on a nonstop basis to weaken Judaism and to indirectly weaken Christianity.
In my book, I describe the notion that, or the dynamic, that socialism is godless and governments don't like competition, so they want to drive God out of the public square wherever they can. Is what you're describing part of that?
Yes, that's exactly part of it. Now, I could see this when I was roughly 12 years old. In 1962, if I have my year correct, the Supreme Court ruled that there should not be school prayer, that we should separate church and state. It's always been part of America, but school prayer is unconstitutional. Now, I remember my younger days, the teacher would say to us, okay, kids, for the first 2 minutes, there's a silent period, and I want you to think of, I can't remember what she said, but I assume she said, think about your religious life, and just to yourself. And after 2 minutes, we'll start the classes. So so we all thought whatever we thought at that age, whatever we knew, and then we started the classes. Now, if that's unconstitutional, if that's like a grave sin, if that's like terrible and it can't last another day, the Supreme Court said we have to eliminate it. So what happened? When you eliminate, so to speak, eliminate the Judeo-Christian God from the schools, what happens? So I'm going to answer the question in 30 seconds. I just have to tell you this tidbit from the Republican convention during the Zoom period of time. I watched it like others on the Zoom. There were maybe 25 speakers. I don't remember any except one. There was a impassioned black pastor from North Carolina. I wish I could tell you his name. I have to congratulate him, but I don't have his name. And he said, he goes to the audience and says, my mama told me, when you take the devil, when you take God out of society, the devil marches in. So I listened to this and I said, since I'm a professional analyst, I said, I like that mama. She's a very good analyst and she figured it out very well. So when the Supreme Court took the Judeo-Christian God out, the devil marched in. The Reds, the Greens, and the Blues are different flavors of devil. And so the Supreme Court, if it knew what it was doing, it should have said, well, sure, they should have left school prayer in. But assuming they were going to say school prayer has to go out, they should have said, we're going to take Judeo-Christian God out of the schools, but we're not going to let the Reds, the Greens, and the Blue false narrative, pretend religions, false narratives come into the schools. But they didn't say that. So what we did is we unilaterally disarmed our Judeo-Christian God, and we allowed these three false narratives in. Now, I call these three false narratives pagan false narratives. And so you could say we're fighting a war of God versus the pagans, which we've been fighting since biblical days. So after I tell people we're in World War III, I say, it's actually World War I. It's the same battle of God versus the pagans. It's just that we have three pagan entities, Reds, Greens, and Blues. And in olden times, there was one pagan, just like everyone, the pagans, whatever that was. And these pagans, like their ancestors, believe in human sacrifice. And their idea of human sacrifice is us. And I don't want to be part of their human sacrifice experiments.
Yeah, in my book, I write about the fact that no civilization has lasted long without a moral code, and no moral code has lasted long without institutions that buttress it, like education, religious institutions. And America today is watching a moral code die without education and religious institutions able to buttress it sufficiently. Okay, well, and I have you just a couple of minutes. You're in the Wall Street Analyst Hall of Fame. Where's this market going with AI and the rest? Are you bullish on American capitalism and the stock market, or where do you stand?
I'm one of those people who's always bullish. And sometimes more bullish than other times. But if you didn't know anything about anything and you bought stocks 100 years ago, I read an article on this, the stock market's gone up 7 or 8% a year for 100 years. Now, it never actually goes up 7 or 8%. It goes up 18 or down 14. But if you just had a ruler, it went up 7, 8. So I tell people, buy the S&P 500, Standard & Poor's 500 index and go to sleep. Or since I come from the healthcare industry, I tell people buy Johnson & Johnson with its 250 operating divisions and go to sleep. And let the managers do what they're good at, and then you just collect your 7 or 8% a year, and then do whatever you want to do with your spare time.
Okay, AI. I remember when computers came and everybody said it would be the end of jobs, and of course it wasn't. What is the future with AI in your view?
Well, articles that I read say that every time there was some revolution, someone got hurt. But somehow the people get hurt retrain themselves or they move. Not that they want to retrain themselves or move, but economics forces them to do that. So, look at how many farmers we had 100 or 200 years ago and how many we have today. Okay, well, the farmers figured out other things to do. And so I think we'll just figure out other things to do and we'll be just fine. Meanwhile, the companies that I invest in or watch, one by one, they're saying, oh, I'm using AI for this and for that, and I'm improving efficiency, I'm lowering my costs. And so I've never heard any company say anything bad about AI. The drug companies are using it to create drugs, new pharmaceuticals faster and faster. So I haven't heard a negative word from any of the healthcare companies that I monitor about AI.
Okay. Finally, the United States during World War I and during World War II made it very clear they were fighting for freedom and democracy. I can't remember whether it's Truman or who was on a boat in the Atlantic directly transmitting into, I think it was Hungary, when Tito was consolidating power, or Yugoslavia. How important is it for America to be a moral beacon to the world?
Well, we are a moral beacon to the world because we believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I can't summarize it any better than it was in the Declaration of Independence. Now, to be more specific, we believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people minus the 10% who are criminals. The Reds, the Greens, and the Blues believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for the 10% who are criminals. So to me, that's what we're fighting about, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But we don't say that every day. I don't hear the president in his non-existent Secretary of Cultural Preservation or the Secretary of Education or any Secretary of anything saying we're fighting for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for everybody in the world. Minus the 10% who are criminals, and those are the people who we're fighting, and those are the people who want to take over the world. We're not going to let them take over the world. So because we don't have that Secretary of Cultural Preservation, we don't have that moral force speaking, and it puts all the responsibility on the president. Well, the president has 987 things to do every day. So he needs a designated person like this. Just pretend, for example, someone like Newt Gingrich, Mark Levin, just our wonderful, I wish he were with us, Charlie Kirk, were the Secretary of Cultural Preservation. Can you imagine with the microphone that comes from it, right? The megaphone that comes from it, how much better off we would be with someone like that educating us day and day and day about these various moral dilemmas that come about all the time.
I agree. And the reinforcement, Will Durant talked about that if the education is disrupted, and by education he meant the transmission of civilization and the values of the civilization are interrupted for more than 2 generations, the civilization essentially dissolves. And we are at these points. Now, in my book, I say that history is no more a straight line than the emotions of your day. You go up and you go down in any particular day. So do civilizations. But at the end of the day, we need people to reinforce the message of what the United States has done in history and why it is a force for good. And in the absence of that, and in books like yours and efforts like yours, that is the challenge to America. That is why Franklin said a republic, if you can keep it. He didn't say if your politicians could keep it. It's up to people like you and me. Mr. Abramowitz, I appreciate you spending time with us today, and thank you for the work that you do. Tell people where they can find you.
By the way, it's up to we the people. You and me, there's a lot of other people besides you and me. We're we the people. So there's 2 things people should do. One is go to my website, savethewest.com. Sign up. It's complimentary. I write an article every 2 weeks, and they'll follow me along in terms of how to save Western civilization. And then I put my ideas all together in my book 5 years ago, updated 4 times, most recently within a year, called The Multifront War, which I discussed the 21 wars that we just discussed. And they should also read that through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and any of the internet book websites.
All right. Thanks so much. And we'll be right back with more of Politics in Perspective. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I'm Tone Dobacaro. Of course, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I'm not asking you to believe everything that Kenneth Abramowitz believes, but I do like his provocative nature because I like when people have to think. And we need to think about what's happening in America today, because this isn't some random occurrence with respect to education and the like. This isn't some random notion. Historically, what happens is that there are those who crave power at the expense of freedom. Talked about that in my opening statement. Well, he's talking about that when he talks about the reds, the greens, and the blues. They want power, and they want it at the expense of individual liberty. And we need to understand that. America is great because it emphasized individual liberty. It will become ungreat when it forgets that lesson. And many, including myself, believe that we've forgotten that lesson. Okay. Now, socialism is being talked about a lot these days. The Democrats and socialism. Will it take over the party? This and that. Well, let's talk about it keeping in mind affordability, because that's a big issue. It's really just a different name to the economy. Stupid. Remember when James Carville said that? The issue is, how's the economy doing? Can people afford things? Now, a recent Fox poll came out and it showed the following. Favorable opinion of the Democratic Socialists of America. Republicans 6%, Democrats 59%. 59%. That's a strong majority. That's almost 2/3. Have a good good view of Zoran Mandami, the lead Democrat Socialist of America person. Overall, and weirdly, they have a slightly less popular view of socialism, 52%. So half the Democrats think socialism is a good idea. Alarmingly, they think capitalism is only at 41%. Now, keep this in mind. Our American school system has nothing but virtually bad things to say about capitalism. That is what our educational institutions talk about, the evils of capitalism. By the way, capitalism is people freely exchanging things. They think that's evil. They think that's not working. But the truth is that socialist policies, herein defined as big government controlling the economy, that doesn't work. So let's look at this next chart. So as we look at this chart, this is the chart of the least affordable states in the country for food and other items. Now, there's also the District of Columbia in there, so you understand that it's more than just the states. But if we keep it right here, 52 is Hawaii. That's a deep blue state. 51 is Massachusetts, a blue state. 50 is California. What should be the richest state in the country is the deep blue state. 49, District of Columbia, deep blue, very deep blue. Alaska, sadly, an enormous amount of blue influence, but also Alaska is remote. So the cost of food and other items is higher because of the transportation costs. 47, New York, deep blue. 46, Maryland, deep blue. 45, New Jersey, pretty darn blue. 44, Washington, deep blue. 43, Maine, more purplish. 42, Connecticut, deep blue. 41, Vermont, deep blue. 40, Rhode Island, deep blue. 39, New Hampshire, pretty blue. 38, Oregon, deep blue. So of those 15, the bottom 15, not a single red state. They're all blue. These are governments that are the most interventionists, that have the most government control over the economy and very high government spending and regulations. So, are they affordable? Socialism does not create affordability. All you have to do is Google the grocery store shelves of socialist countries, Venezuela, Cuba, and the like, and counterbalance that with where you go to shop. If you're in California at the grocery stores like Safeway or Whole Foods, look at the abundance. And then look at the fact that Venezuela went from one of the richest to them eating zoo animals. Socialism makes things unaffordable. And that's just the reality of it. You cannot, government intervention and control raises the cost to produce things. And the higher that something costs, the less of it you get. The reason why there are less Rolls Royces sold than Fords is because Fords cost so much less. The less something costs, the more you get, the higher. If they were the same price, Ford and Rolls Royce, people would take the Rolls Royce. It's an unbelievably nice luxury car. But Rolls Royce costs more to produce, and therefore there are less of them. There's less Ferraris. There's less, you name it. The same applies to food. As government makes it more expensive to produce food, you get less food production. The more government intervenes in the economy, the more it costs. I guess, of course, no one's saying there should be no regulation. But why is it that the bottom 15 are all blue states? There isn't mass deaths from food in the red states. It is because government makes things unaffordable. Going back to my opening statement, government control versus personal freedom. Those are the two big ideas in history. And here's affordability in this regard demonstrating that. Now let's go to another aspect of unaffordability, which is government waste. Now, what is government waste? They are taking money out of your pocket, and then what they're doing is on what they want. Sometimes it's to their NGOs and the like. So the United States currently under the Trump administration is trying to fight fraud. There was a recent headline here where Treasury intercepts $99 million in federal payments to deceased individuals under the Trump fraud order. Now think about that. That's $100 million that was being sent out in the past to people who are deceased. Now, what if that $100 million went to Social Security recipients? We're in a Social Security crisis. They tell us 6 years from now it's going to be bankrupt. If I put my glasses on my Facebook post says that $99 million is equivalent to 45,040 Social Security benefit payments for a month for 45,000 plus people. Now, if we don't reduce government, as Trump is trying to do, government waste, it comes at the cost of Social Security, which means that people get less Social Security, which means government waste is unaffordable. My point here is that big government by its nature is wasteful. It reduces economic success. It reduces economic abundance. And eventually it cuts into its own benefits like Social Security and Medicare. And the United States voters need to come to grips with that. There's a lot going on in this world. And of the two big ideas, more government control and individual freedom, I'm going to continue to stand for individual freedom. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. Please join me on Substack, politicalvanguard.com. You can get your daily news update, plus a listing of all of the podcasts that I've had. And we'll see you here next week on Politics in Perspective.